business, and I've got one too. You can't mind your business. What's the matter with you?
Welcome to the Brand Shorthand Podcast. I'm your host, Mark Vandergrift, and with me today are two special people. You already know our eighth wonder of the world for her positioning acumen, Lorraine Kessler. Welcome, Lorraine.
Hey, welcome.
We also have Mike DeVilling, president of WestShore PR in Detroit, Michigan, with us. Welcome, Mike.
Thanks, Mark. Good to see you. And Lorraine, good to see you as well, although I'm a little jealous because I hear you're up at the lake right now.
Oh yes, this is H2O for any people who are Lakers.
Of course.
John will verify it for you.
We'll check that later, Lorraine.
Yeah.
Well, Mike, let me share your bio with our audience so they know who you are. Mike has an extensive background in media relations, social media content development, and overall communication strategy development. From startups to Fortune 500 companies, and from consumer initiatives to highly targeted B2B campaigns, Mike has driven client strategy, media relations, and social media results for clients of all sizes. He's helped build startups into recognized brands. He's helped make some of Detroit's most important events major players on a world stage. One interesting tidbit about Mike is that he has run 7 marathons. This is a quote from Mike. Marathon training takes discipline, it takes energy, it takes focus, it takes determination, resiliency, and toughness. Developing and implementing a successful long-term communication plan takes the same focus and determination. Well, Mike, it's obvious you have a passion for PR. Prior to WestShore Public Relations, Mike was a senior partner at global agency Finn Partners Detroit office. He credits his career success to his mentors and teammates at 2 of Detroit's most successful agencies, John Bailey and Associates and Eisbrenner Public Relations. He has also had stops with the DeVilling Group, Cars.com, and Casey Communications. So welcome, Mike.
Well, thank you very much. Listening to my own bio, one thing I'm very thankful for is that I'm actually better in the communications business than I am as a runner. The last marathon that I happened to run, I finished in 578th place. And one of my friends happened to ask, well, Mike, how'd you do today? And I said, well, I finished 578th. And he just shook his head and said, Mike, I really expected more out of you. And that has actually become a long time running joke between myself and Lorraine and her husband, John. And I am very proud of the running stuff, but I think the most important thing is the lessons that I was able to learn as a runner, as an athlete when I was younger. And that really does translate into this business really well.
Well, the fact that you used the word finished is amazing.
Well, how many people were in the race, Mike?
Probably 2,000 or 3,000, and it actually was my personal best that I ran that day. So I was very happy with the results that day.
It's all about the numbers. Yeah.
Yep, that's right.
And while you're in Detroit, you're an Ohio State fan, right?
I have been trapped behind enemy lines for nearly 50 years.
Good to know. So Mark just read a lot about your experience. Can you, Mike, elaborate a little bit on some of the industries you've covered with your PR prowess?
Primarily in the automotive industry, but even in the automotive industry, it's so big. There are so many different things that you can do. A lot of things are consumer oriented. And that's maybe if you're working for an OEM and you're launching a new vehicle, which I've had some experience working for a startup called Elio Motors that was launching a vehicle. I'm now working for a company called Bollinger Motors, which is launching a Class 4 electric truck. Those are a little bit more of what people think of when they think of the auto industry. But I've also worked on the business to business side with a lot of companies that do data. So back in the day, it was R.L. Polk and Company. Then I worked with Experian Automotive for a long time. And both of those organizations take registration data, they carve it up into useful marketing data and sell it to people within the industry. We worked with a lot of that data as a media relations tool and also to make their experts quotable people in the industry and made some of them rock stars in the industry. So a lot of the auto stuff is business to business. My current agency, we're going a little bit more in the consumer packaged goods direction. We're working with Downey's Potato Chips, which is a local brand here in Detroit. Papa's Kitchen, which does marinades and salad dressings, which is also a local startup here in Detroit. And then we are also working with a lot of Catholic high schools, which I had never worked for an educational organization in my life, and I'm not Catholic, but that gives us an outside view of kind of an objective viewpoint of how to counsel those schools. So it's been a really nice piece of growth for us as an agency.
That's really interesting. So, have you worked with aftermarket automotive as well?
I'm actually not, and that's
Oh,
again,
okay.
that's another area that's very specialized, and
Right.
it's you can work with OEMs, you can work with supplier companies, you can work with the retail side, you can work with aftermarket. I've done a lot with supplier companies and a lot with on the retail side, particularly technology companies that are selling into automotive retailers.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Very good. So, you've mentioned a lot of brands that have like kind of stood out or that you've worked on. Is there any particular client or brand that to you really stands out in your experience?
Well, I think the biggest thing that I ever worked on was North American International Auto Show, or as most people probably refer to it as the Detroit Auto Show.
Right.
Every major auto manufacturer was there. We had, I believe, 6,000 media credentials that credentialed media that was covering the show. And if you think about it, that's like twice as many reporters as cover the Super Bowl.
Oh my
So
God.
it was an incredibly important event to the city of Detroit in that it had about $580 million of economic activity. It was incredibly important to everybody within the auto industry because it brought so many international and national reporters there. And to my career personally, I made many of the best contacts that I've made with different reporters in the industry from being on that show.
That's super. That's good to hear because shows have gone through their waning times, and there's always as long as I've worked and I started in automotive aftermarket, working for or representing Champion Spark Plug and
Mhm.
Monroe brakes and mufflers and things like that, Belden wires and cables. And we would go to these auto shows, and every year it was like the question: Do we need to be there? Do we need to be at these shows? And then, of course, fast forward, we had COVID and we had all that, and so. But I still think that shows provide still the best high touch, immediate reaction, plus an opportunity to be theatrical, to do something that captures the imagination in a big way. I mean, how do
Uh,
you feel about that?
I think more than theatrical, it's experiential.
Yeah,
And little history of the Detroit PR market. When you were working for supplier companies, the Super Bowl for you was the SAE show. And
right.
probably I was at an agency back when I was at Eisbrenner. We had 20 clients that would exhibit at the SAE show, and it was huge. It got a lot of media. But once the internet came along, companies started to put their product information on a website. You didn't really need to be in the same room with your customers at the time. And over time, that trade show lost a lot of its importance. But what I'm finding out now, based on just a show we just went to with a client, which was the ACT Expo, which is Advanced Clean Transportation Expo, um, we feel like getting people behind the wheel of the Bollinger B4, which is a product that they're going to launch later this year, is incredibly important with journalists. So, it's one thing to read a press release, it's one thing to go on a website, but to be there in person, feel the G force and the acceleration, to feel the ride and handling characteristics. You can't beat that for a live experience, and shows will still play that type of a role. So, I think shows still have a huge part in any marketing communications program. It's just the way that you use those shows has evolved quite a bit and will probably continue to evolve.
Yeah,
Super.
it's interesting. The augmented reality that you see at these shows now, you're talking about experiential. It's really neat how they're bringing together reality and the digital in this augmented reality. Are
Mhm.
you seeing a lot of that at these shows that you're attending?
Well, to come clean, I've never been to CES, and I'm going out to CES this year, so I expect to see a lot of it out there. The ACT
Mhm.
Expo was a little bit more old school and didn't have quite that advanced trade show booths.
Mhm.
But man, you could do an entire show on augmented reality and those types of experiences with the folks that build the trade show booths,
Yeah.
and there's some incredible stuff that's out there.
Yeah, that's
Well,
good. Well, before we get too pigeonholed into an area, let's back up because we're talking public
Yeah,
relations with an expert. And one of the recommendations we make all the time, and even though we're full service here, so we're not PR focused, but our statement is this: public relations is the best way to build a brand. Give us your perspective on that statement and why you believe it to be true or maybe not true.
I think it's one of the most important tools in the toolbox. To get that third party credibility from an editor or reporter that shows, it kind of underscores all of the product claims that you're making, and you have that independent verification from them. It means a lot. And people who are information seekers, if they're going out and they're looking, they're Googling for stories, it's one thing to land on a company's website, but it's another to find a story in the Wall Street Journal or a key trade publication like Automotive News. So it's very important for clients to be out there, to have good relationships with the media, and to really have a compelling story that they can tell and get some positive coverage from it.
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, it's interesting because we have to convince clients of that statement sometimes. And then we ask them, tell us what Starbucks advertised. And they can't name it. And we'll
Right,
say, oh, give us Starbucks slogan. And they can't name it.
Hmm.
right,
And then we let them know that I think it was 2015 was the first ad that Starbucks actually ran nationally. And they built their whole uh, position just on public relations.
Yeah.
So once they hear a big brand name like that, then they go, oh, okay, I guess it can be done.
yeah, it doesn't surprise me. One of the things in my business and the different agencies I've been with is a lot of executives at companies don't really understand what you mean when you say that until they see their competitor in automotive news and they think, well, gee, it would be great if we had a story like this. It's like,
Right.
yes, that's what we've been trying to tell you. You need to be out there and be
Right.
more proactive. But yeah, the competitor getting coverage probably does more for my business than any marketing tactic I could ever do.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, it's interesting because some of the times when we make that comment, they look at you like, well, PR, that's what we're doing. They don't even understand the concept of a public relations execution versus marketing versus advertising.
Right.
Like all the terms anymore just get glommed together. And I think that's what creates the challenge. They don't realize the discipline that is public relations.
Well, and I think the other part of it too is agencies are starting to diversify their services.
Mhm.
And there are a lot of things that didn't, I tell this to people all the time. There are things in my business that didn't even exist 5 to 10 years ago.
Mhm.
My daughter's 27 years old. She works for an agency in Manhattan. She does influencer marketing.
Mhm.
And, if you'd have told me 10 years ago that your daughter's going to have a career in influencer marketing, I would have said, well, what's that? And so you're starting to see more PR firms do those types of things. You're starting to see more ad agencies doing those types of things.
Mhm.
And there's kind of a jump ball right now between all these different marketing companies who have their traditional skill sets, but now they're trying to say, all right, we can do social media, we can do influencer marketing. And so I think one of the things that we talked about in the last couple of days preparing for the show is what are the billings of different PR firms. If you look at the billings from the top 10 PR firms over the last 10 years, they've doubled. They've gone to 3
Mhm.
million or 3 billion rather from about 1.5 billion. And a lot of that has to do with putting new skill sets together and new service offerings together. I was at Fin Partners and media relations was probably less than half of what we were doing. They were doing a lot of social media and a lot of digital, and they're very good at it. So I think you'll see more firms that are really good at more things, especially if you're going to be a big firm and grow.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yep.
And I think it's important too in PR and maybe you don't agree with this, but I think it's important to focus too, whether that focus is on industries like that you really understand, where you've cultivated a media base, rather than jumping into every single marketplace or industry, because you just get watered down. But you can now capitalize on those relationships if you focus on one or two strong industries. And that doesn't mean you can't help a small business or another customer who comes along, but it's kind of where you position your strength. Because we've found that, for example, there's a lot of PR firms that really specialize in investor relations.
Hmm.
And that is its own animal. It is
Yes.
a segment of PR, but it's very different. It's not
It's an important
promotional.
segment and it's a very lucrative segment. And it's
Right.
one that, if a young person told me they were coming into this business now, I would say, all right, maybe get a major in journalism and communications, but maybe minor in accounting or finance,
Mhm.
something on the financial side, because anyone who can communicate the financial side of a business is going to have a lot of opportunities in their career.
Right, right. So I think that's important. And what I found is that agencies who focus on investor relations from a client standpoint as well are dealing with a different client buyer. They're dealing
Yes.
often with corporate communications, who's ever in charge of that, who's very close to the CEO and the investors and the board, where those who are promoting products and services are working more with the sales or the marketing agencies and CMO and people closer to the cash register, I guess is an old saying.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think I brought up Elio Motors, which is a startup that I did some work for. At one time, they were traded over the counter on the penny stocks, and we had an investor relations person that handled 90% of that communication. We
Yep.
still did a few things on the PR side, but he was very specialized. He'd taken several companies public, and I learned a lot from him. And I would never have tried to even replicate what he could do because he had that expertise. So you're absolutely right about that.
Mhm.
Developing an expertise in a particular niche can be very lucrative for you. I'll throw out a shout out to one of my favorite agencies here in Detroit. It's called Bianchi Public Relations. Jim Bianchi was one of my mentors at Eisbrenner Public Relations, but he probably 95% of his business is in automotive suppliers. And
Mhm.
I tell people all the time, nobody does automotive suppliers as well as Jim Bianchi. And it's exactly what you said. He's got that
Mhm.
niche expertise and he's just really, really good at it.
Yeah. That's so cool. Well, I'm going to go something that I think you put in your little bio to us is you take a strategic approach to your clients.
Mhm.
So, talk a little bit about what that means. I mean, a lot of people throw around the word strategy and strategic approach, right? And we hear all these buzzwords, but what does that really mean in terms of your practice, Mike?
Well, I think the most important thing that we work with at the early stages with any client is who is your target audience? Who's the person that's really making that purchasing decision? Who are the people within that organization that you'll be working with every day? And once we segment that audience out, how do they get their information? Are
Mhm.
they on LinkedIn? Are they Facebook users? Do they read automotive news? Do they read Wall Street Journal? So once we have that target audience, then we figure out what uh, the best channel to reach those people are. But then beyond that, it's really truly what is your story? Because there's a lot of companies that think just because they exist, somebody should be writing a story about them. But you really have to have something compelling. So we'll go into a particular organization and based on whatever trends are happening in the marketplace at any time and what their particular strengths are, we'll build their communications plan around those elements so that we're very laser focused on going after their customers. We're very laser focused on the channel that they need to go through, and we're very laser focused on the message that they want to get out there.
Yeah, and it's interesting because Mark knows this, I think. When I was first introduced to positioning in the very beginning of my career in 1981, and I was handed the book, I read the book and it really lit me up. I was so excited. But where I saw it really being practiced first was in our PR practice at the firm
Okay.
because you had to have an angle. You had to have a reason why editors, right? They're just like any audience. and they're thinking two things. They're thinking, what's new and different that it excites me, but moreover, what's new and different that will excite my audience, because they're the
Right.
gatekeeper, if you will,
Right.
for the audience, and the audience is what pays their subscriptions and monetizes their business. And so I found that our PR staff, really more than our ad staff, were really thinking about that more strategically.
In media relations, you're serving two customers. One is the client that pays your bills. The other is the reporters that are going to write the stories. And you really do have to treat them like a customer. What's in it for them? What is the value that they get out of this transaction? If there's not something there that's compelling to their readers or viewers that's going to build their audience, it's no use to them whatsoever, and they
Yeah.
will pass you by.
Yeah.
Some of the other things though that are happening in media relations right now, and I don't think we talked about this at all, it has become harder and harder to actually get media coverage today.
Mhm.
You're seeing a lot more reporters leave that profession and become PR people. One of the stats that I've seen recently is that there are 7 PR people for every 1 reporter today.
Oh my
Uh,
God.
and another stat that I saw recently, and I should have sourced this before I came on, but um, that the typical reporter only answers 3.4% of the pitches that they get through email. So that's just a staggering number. Now
Right.
there's people out there that are doing some things that from a best practices standpoint aren't good. They're doing what we call spray and pray, which is we're just going to shoot this message out there and see if it lands on somebody. That's absolutely not the best way to do media relations. The best way to do it is to really truly understand what the beat is that that reporter covers and what makes this story compelling for their beat and their readers. And you have to do some research about their publications, stories that they've written in the past, and what might interest them. The challenge today, a lot of times, is clients don't want to invest in the relationship with the agency to build those relationships. They think you have some sort of magic PR fairy dust that you can just go in and sprinkle and get a story, but you really have to do a lot of work. And
Yeah.
I was watching one of your past podcasts recently, and you were talking about the Nike swoosh. And
Mhm.
everybody comes to you and says, well, we want to have a logo that's as compelling as Nike. Well, Nike spends what, $1 billion, or I don't even know how much they spend, but it's an enormous amount of money on building that brand. And you can't do those kinds of things overnight. Media relations is very similar. I was working on a client several years ago. I'd been working on it for 2 weeks. I was going through my normal process of putting that plan together and getting that strategic plan ready to go. And we were on a call with a board member, and the board member said, "Why haven't we been on the Today Show yet?" And I went, you know? And so
Yeah.
that's kind of a running joke with a lot of PR people, is that the client will call you up and say, well, I want to be on the Today Show. Well, you and every other company that's out there. And the Today
Yeah.
Show has about 6 minutes of content that's not paid for. And it's a very difficult nut to crack. If I have people that are saying things like that, I probably will pass on taking their business.
Yeah, that's pretty smart. And a lot of times too, uh, you know, if your idea, if your client's idea isn't that novel and important, it has to be both.
Yeah.
Probably importance first.
Yeah.
There's no hope of getting on the Today Show. You can sell a lot of a certain product. I mean, there's a big difference. I can sell a lot of it to a target constituency who
Yeah.
needs what I have. But from a media standpoint, it's got to be news, and that's a whole different bar, I think. Yeah,
It is, and it's a very difficult bar to get to for
yeah.
anybody.
I
Uh,
love, I love it.
and again, if
Mhm.
today's show is your only goal, call a PR firm in New York who might have a relationship with them. It gives you a better chance. But there are, for most businesses, much better, much more cost effective, and much more impactful media relations strategies that you can use. The clients that I'm working with now, being in automotive news for them is probably a bigger win than being in USA Today.
Yeah,
That's where their customer is getting his news in the morning, and that's where they need to be. And
right.
so working with a firm that knows that audience and knows those reporters. If that's the business that you're in, that's who you should be working with. And don't worry about the other fluffy stuff.
So take the converse of that.
Mhm.
You're still talking about what most people would call traditional PR, where there's a gatekeeper. Talk about the other side of this, where we have so many media now where you can do an end run around the gatekeeper. How are you utilizing those tools in a way that perhaps you didn't have available to you 15 years ago?
I think that's a really good point that while media is still really important, you have lots of other ways to get the message out. And so a lot of times when a client comes to us and says, well, we have this thing that we're doing and we want to get something out there, we'll look at it from the standpoint of, does this make a good media story, or is this something that they should write about on their LinkedIn page? Is it something that we could do an op-ed in a trade publication? Or is it something we should do a video for and put it on YouTube? So there are a lot of other ways to get the word out there, and we'll sort of rank things by whatever it is that they want to use, and come up with the tactical things based on that. And if something's not super compelling newsworthy, there's still really good stories out there that aren't headline news. And I think that social media has been a great way to get some of those stories out there.
Yeah, super. And I think too, you mentioned video. The beauty of video, whether you house it on your website or you distribute it separately, is any product that can be demonstrated. Now, I
Yeah,
can't feel the engine, as you talked about,
right.
experientially, but I can get close to it or closer to it in video than I can. So, and Ogilvy was a big believer in if you have a product benefit you can demonstrate it. That was the starting place. So, I'm sure you found that to be really helpful for you.
I agree with that. And the video in general, you're going to see more and more video for a couple reasons. One, broadband allows people to watch more video on their own devices, so it's
Mhm.
much more accessible than it used to be. But the other is
Right.
creating video has become much more democratized, for a better word. Everybody's got an iPhone. Everybody can create their own video. We are doing this business has kind of come and gone, but and will come again. But we're doing a lot more video on social media. We had a client that one of the Catholic schools we work with wanted to do an alumni program, and so we interviewed 10 alums. We did short videos for each one of those, and we put it up on their YouTube page. We put it up on their website. We put it up on their social channels, and it was a great way to honor some of their top alums. But those weren't the type of stories that you're going to get on, in the local newspaper or on the local radio about your alumni. It's just not something that works that way. So it was very cost effective for them, and it was very powerful for them to share these stories. So you'll see much more video moving forward in the PR business for sure.
Yeah. Like one of the things I've witnessed, I'm a big YouTube podcaster of like discussion of true crime, like trials that are going on
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
Just finding ways to get away with murder. So far, I haven't found one.
Wow.
But anyway,
I
one
need
of
to tell John to run and
yeah,
hide.
he already knows. My daughter, we've already informed him that
Okay.
we haven't found the perfect way yet, and it's really hard with devices because they can track everything, right? But one of the things I've noticed that they're doing with video, which I think is really ingenious, they're using video to promote the podcast. In other words, they're doing like these little snippets, these little shorts.
Yep.
They're not necessarily a commercial promoting the podcast, but it's like a snippet of information from the person you watch, which then makes you engage even more with the full content. And I just think, wow, we're just continue to keep learning and have so many different ways to be creative to get the attention and keep the attention of the audiences that we're after.
No question about that. And I think the two of you, just from a business to business standpoint, are smart to do your own podcast. I think
Yeah.
more and more people will self-publish, self-broadcast. And
Mhm.
if you can find some compelling content, then it's a great method to get things out there. And I think this is just a very smart thing for your firm to do.
Right. Well, that's why we have you, because we want smart thinkers, because we're a thinking agency. We believe in strategy first and then making next. So
Hmm.
you have to first be thinking about what's de quoi s'agit, what is the essence of the problem that the client has, strategically solving that, and then tactically applying what works. And so that's why we have you, because you're a thinking agency like us. I think we have a lot in common.
That's probably the one thing that I left out of the
Mhm.
uh, developing strategy is you really are truly trying to solve a problem.
Right.
Um, and I'm glad you brought that up because that is an
Mhm.
important part of it.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, we're talking a lot of new things in the last few minutes here. And one of the questions that I always love, because I'm kind of a tech geek, is what tools in the PR area specifically, in the discipline of public relations, that you've been using recently that either have changed the way you do your job, made it more efficient, and or what gets you excited? Like, I've never seen this. I never thought we'd have anything like this. And it's really it's a game changer in public relations.
Well, let me tell you a little bit about history in this business as according to me. Starting out in 1990, that's pre-internet, right? So that makes me an absolute
Mhm.
dinosaur. But if a client was doing a speech, you would get all these photos of their visuals that they would be using in the speech, and you would take them to the Photoshop and get them developed. You would bring them back and you would take the little carousel and you would load them one by one into the carousel. And then if you had to make a change, it was like, well, we got to throw that one away and go back to the photo thing, right? The invention of, I think the first program that we used at that agency was Persuasion, I think it was called. But then PowerPoint came on pretty soon after that. And even though people get tired of PowerPoint and PowerPoint presentations get mocked, it really did change the way you went about doing presentations, because all of a sudden you've cut all these man hours out of the process, because you can make edits on the fly if you need to. And that just made everybody more efficient. And most of the technology that's out there right now makes you more efficient. We can do so much more now because of collaborative tools like Google Docs or Slack, and even simple things like email. But I mean, just to be able to do this, to have a Zoom call on a
Mhm.
podcast is an amazing thing that no one would have ever thought of 5 or 10 years ago. So the productivity has been incredible. And everybody right now is a little bit scared of artificial intelligence and what it is going to do to, is it ever going to replace a PR person? I don't think it is. I think it's going to make PR people better.
Mhm.
One of the things that we've done in some of our writing projects is used AI as almost like a research tool.
Mhm.
Back in the day, I actually used to get, when I was an intern at a firm, they would send me to the public library to do research and find things. Well, then Google came along and no one ever went to the library again, and you could find things on Google. I think artificial intelligence is really, in a way, an extension of Google, in that you can put some factors into whatever it is that you're trying to do, and it spits out some information for you very quickly. And it's
Mhm.
just the next evolution of being able to use information for a particular purpose. Now, you've still got to go through it and edit it very carefully, and you've got to fact check it a little bit still, but it's speeding things up so that you can be more productive. What
Mhm.
it'll probably see is corporate PR staffs might be smaller or maintain the same size that they are now, but still be more productive. You'll see agencies be able to do more work, and actually probably charge more on an hourly basis because they're so much more productive with what they can do. And so I think it's just going to make everybody better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we've seen that. We've seen that already. Right, Mark? I mean, I can tell you that the agency, Innis Majority, as an agency of 33 people around there,
Mhm.
we do the work that our agency did when we had 100 people in
Oh, yeah.
Toledo. Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
Well, and
And
we have
better.
a platform called Critical Mention. I'm sure you've heard of that.
Yes.
Mike. And its ability to go out there and you put a query in and figure out not only your own clients, but their competition,
Yes.
what the mentions are out there, what the share of market, share of voice is, what the value is of those mentions, the number of reads, all that stuff. And it's like that. Well,
Right.
we could have never done that before
Right.
that fast. If we had the capability, it was going back and you were looking at old data by that point in time.
Right.
Now it's real time. So it just is really kind of, I think it's a game changer in the PR area because
Mhm.
our PR team uses critical mention for pretty much the initial step for almost every engagement we have on the PR side.
I think that's really smart, and that's also the type of those types of analytical tools are really helpful because it shows what kind of progress you're making. It shows what kind of challenges you still have to overcome, and it allows you to make adjustments on your program on the fly that
Right.
you just, like you said, you couldn't do that
Mhm.
15 years ago. There's no way. And so yeah, those kinds of things do get me very excited as well.
Yeah, it was interesting. We did it for an ice cream stand of all places out in California, and it found a Reddit thread that we wouldn't have found
Huh.
even doing a Google search. And the whole thread was about the closing of the old shop and the opening of the new and what the city did to them, and like this whole political conversation that allowed our team to take a different angle than where we were going at the moment, and it was highly successful. We got placement in the LA Times. So it was a
That's
good thing.
awesome. I
Yeah.
like
So you didn't get on the Today Show with that.
right.
No,
You
I
did.
don't know
You have
why
to
the
get on the
Today
Today
Show
Show.
didn't care about an ice cream stand out in Costa Mesa, but
Yeah.
it was good.
So, Mike, I have a question. It's a little off the skew, but because I started in '81, you started in the '90s. Not to reiterate our ancient
Or
age,
advanced
but
technology.
yeah, but one of the things I think we did lose that's affected the business in not as positive a way is there was mentoring. You mentioned some of your mentors.
Yeah.
I had great mentors who
Yes.
basically taught me how to think, not what to think, but how to think.
Right.
What do you think about that? I mean, is that something that,
About mentoring in
yeah,
general.
yeah.
I think that it is a lost art. I feel like companies have become so focused on getting things from A to B that they're forgetting the human element, the human
Hmm.
relationships, and they're forgetting about the educational needs that employees have.
Hmm.
I walked out of the college campus, I didn't know anything.
Yeah.
Fortunately, in my first job, I worked for a guy named Bob Scugan, who had been an editor at, I want to say, the Houghton Mining Exec, and was Governor Milliken's point person in the UP up north. And he knew everybody, and he knew how to write in AP style, and he knew what journalists wanted and what they didn't want. And I was so fortunate to be able to work for him and call him my friend that I don't see relationships like that forming
Right.
today. And one of the sad parts about it is you'll hear the phrase "okay, boomer," from
Yeah.
younger
Yeah.
employees. I don't think younger employees realize how important it is for them to learn from people who have been through the fires already.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lack of patience on a lot of people to, they want to be the CEO when they're 25. And it's like,
Mhm.
you really need to have a little bit of perspective. You need to be coached well by really good people. And so to look for a mentor and find a mentor, it's an absolute blessing for someone. And I hope that older employees are still actively looking to mentor people. I think one of the hardest parts about that today is companies being out of the office. And
Mhm.
if you're not there in the office, you're not having those quick conversations. And, it's, well, let's set up a Zoom call so I can mentor you. It's kind of forced.
Yeah.
So I think that all of those factors are contributing to mentoring not being as done well today as it was back then. And I think that's going to cost the business world dearly 5 or 10 years from now.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's interesting too. We were just talking about this today and what they're teaching at schools regarding marketing. And I think they're between and betwixt, right? Or betwixt and between. It's they're trying to teach the latest and the greatest,
Yeah.
and they're also stuck. Well, I don't know if the word's stuck, but they're trying to teach the foundational principles of marketing. But what's happened is they're caught in between, and they're teaching this stuff that's outdated a lot of times. And so instead of teaching, like we were talking about digital marketing, what's paid search, what's search engine optimization, what's programmatic, what's connected TV, what's native, tactics, right?
Right.
They don't even know about those. They're still teaching what are the basics of social media, which has evolved considerably in the last
Right.
15 years, and they forget the basics. So you said your daughter's in influencer marketing. Well, we're old enough, or the old farts on this call are old enough to remember the idea of celebrity endorsement.
Right.
Mhm.
And it's like, well, that's what influencer marketing is today. It's executed differently.
Right.
Different people do it because they happen to catch lightning in a bottle. But it's the principle there is celebrity endorsement. And
Yeah.
it comes with all the same risks. It comes with all the same kind of execution that you need to do with it. It just is in a different format. And when you look at a younger person and go, yeah, we had influencer marketing, it's just called something different
Right.
today.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
like calling
100%.
it content marketing. Content marketing is PR, right?
Yeah.
In many
It's
ways and shapes and
storytelling.
forms, it is.
Yeah.
It's putting out stories and telling stories in different ways. But even I think the difference with influencer marketing today is a lot of people, I mean, we're in the business, but
Mhm.
I think a lot of consumers don't realize these people are paid. Like we
They
knew
get a
in
lot
our
of
day,
hits. That's true.
we knew in our day that Tiger Woods was paid, right?
Right. Right.
We knew that he's on the commercial for Buick, which made no sense. But I don't think a lot of these people who have these influencers realize they're being paid.
I agree with that. And although
Mhm.
you will see a lot of areas where it says, paid endorsement, but maybe it's
Yeah,
in really tiny type. But
right.
I agree that that's a big problem as well, because there's not as much credibility in those as there is if you're talking to an editor. And so I think you need to be a little bit more upfront about uh, whether or not something is a paid contract or not.
Well, Mike, that was great, but I expected more out of you. A huge thanks to Mike DeVilling, president of WestShore PR, for his willingness to take time out of his busy schedule to come on to the Brand Shorthand podcast. Mike, thank you. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Mark and Lorraine. It was really good to be here. I had a lot of fun, and hopefully do it again someday.
Yep.
Sure. Well, thank you for all those who joined us today, especially all the new followers who track Mike in whatever he's doing, whether it's running a marathon or anything else. And if you haven't liked, shared, subscribed, or told your friends about the Brand Shorthand podcast, please do. And until next time, have an amazing day.
Business but my own.